Well, hello, our fellow friends, our fellow neighbors, and our fellow shining stars. Our next trolley stop is here, and our next trolley stop is now. Welcome back to another all-new episode of PR from the Heart's Children's Book Spotlight Series. To be precise, we have reached episode number 215. That is the 215 trolley stop here at the Children's Book Spotlight Series here at PR from the Heart as part of not only our summer reading season, but the official kickoff of our 10-year anniversary celebration here at PR from the Heart. My name is John Masiulionis, the manager of PR from the Heart and the co-host of the Children's Book Spotlight Series, joined as always by my faithful furry friend and forever companion, little Forrest. He is in the celebration mode. He's not having, little, doggy cake, but he's having a nice, delicious salmon on his end of things as well. We hope that all of you are enjoying officially now the start of your month of July, wherever you are and wherever you may be. The temperatures are getting warmer, but technically during the course of the summer, when the temperatures start to get a little warmer, our hearts tend to open that much more so. And get ready for a major heart explosion here on episode number 215, the Children's Book Spotlight Series. It's so interesting. It's so fascinating how life comes full circle in many ways, and especially over the course of these past several weeks and months leading into the kickoff of the 10-year anniversary celebration of PR from the Heart. And over the years, I've had many parents and educators and children's authors and random passersby to say, where did it all begin for you, John? Where did the Children's Book Spotlight Series begin? Where did PR from the Heart begin? And I go back to my time in Buffalo, New York, born and raised in Buffalo before moving out to San Diego in the fall of 2020. And growing up, there were several shows that really touched my heart. My inner child is still present, and he is fully present as part of episode number 214 of the Children's Book Spotlight Series, in case any of you are wondering what I used to look like growing up. Full mat of hair, little clip-on tie, vest, whole 9 yards. But this little guy, who still resides within me, was a huge fan of several programs on PBS, including the one that we are spotlighting on today's program. And it's interesting because, yes, times have changed. Things are a little bit different than maybe where they were back in the 80s and in the 90s. Times back then were a lot simpler. You could just enjoy things that much more. But we encourage all of you, our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course, our fellow shining stars. If you are a parent, if you are a caregiver, if you are a grandparent, you really, especially right now, are taking the time to nurture the minds, the hearts, the souls of your children. And you're wondering, can we go back to those times? The answer is yes. For the purposes of episode number 215, the Children's Book Spotlight Series, we can. Because any sort of a problem, if you're experiencing or a large challenge in your life, all you have to do is look to that butterfly in the sky. Because today, and on this week's episode of the Children's Book Spotlight Series, to kick off our 10-year anniversary celebration, we are indeed going twice as high. You see how things come full circle? There's so many more Buffalo synchronicities. So to all of our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course, our fellow shining stars in the Buffalo, Western New York, and Southern Ontario area, you may hear multiple Buffalo references through the course of our conversation today. We encourage all of you, our listeners and viewers, again, our friends and neighbors, and our fellow shining stars, to head on over to Amazon.com if that is your favorite online vehicle of your choosing, or to any major bookstore to purchase your copies of Creating Reading Rainbow. The book is now available, The Untold Story of a Beloved Children's Series. If you head on over to your favorite children's and or independent bookstore and they do not stock their copies of Creating Reading Rainbow, make that kind recommendation, letting them know that you heard about it right here on the Children's Book Spotlight Series. One of the many ways that you can pledge your support for Tony Buttino, for Barbara Irwin, and for Pam Johnson is by leaving a 5-star review on Amazon, letting them know that they're doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, educators, for those who love great children's books, and for those who actually still have Reading Rainbow t-shirts in their closets or drawers. And raise my hand, indicate I was actually going to wear my Reading Rainbow t-shirt, but I said, you know what, we got to go with the business look, as we always do here on the Children's Book Spotlight Series. But as soon as we're done recording this episode, I'm spending the entire day wearing my gray Reading Rainbow t-shirt. Proudly of course, is heading out back to where it all began for us, where it all began for Reading Rainbow. The trolley travels across the country, all the way to the beautiful area of Buffalo, New York, Western New York, just right near Southern Ontario. Joining us, as you can tell, it's a full party here on episode number 215, the Children's Book Spotlight Series. Joining us are the co-creators of Creating Reading Rainbow, authors Barbara Irwin, Tony Buttino, and Pam Johnson. This really means a lot on so many levels. We had the chance to connect in the PR from the Heart Green Room. There's so many divine synchronicities and connections, and we'll talk about that. But first off, congratulations on the release of this book. I can sense and tell that it's been a labor of love, and you guys have really enjoyed the process of putting all of this together. Thank you for spending some time with us here. And officially, there's no other better way that could kick off the 10-year anniversary celebration here at PR from the Heart. So thanks for spending some time with us here in our neighborhood today, guys.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, John. We're honored to be here.
Glad to be here.
For those, of course, if you're wondering, what is Reading Rainbow? Well, you are in for a treat. If you are, a newbie, you've never heard of the program beforehand, or maybe you've recently said, I've seen that Butterfly in the Sky documentary, and I want to learn a little bit more about Reading Rainbow. One of the other ways that you can pledge your support for Barbara, for Tony, and for Pam, as well as for us here at the Children's Book Spotlight Series and PR from the Heart, is to subscribe to PR from the Heart's official YouTube channel and share this very special trolley stop that you are now enjoying. That is episode number 215, Children's Book Spotlight Series. Join the more than 16,000 members of the PR from the Heart family that are our official subscribers to our YouTube channel. A story really of humble beginnings and a lot of perseverance. We love spotlighting origin stories here on the Children's Book Spotlight Series, and there's multiple origin stories. Specifically, there is the origin story of Reading Rainbow, and there is the origin story of creating Reading Rainbow. And I'm fascinated to learn as well how the three of you ended up connecting with one another. And I think that that's probably, before we get into the origin stories, beginning with the origin story of Reading Rainbow, could you share with us, for those who are not necessarily familiar with the three of you individually, there are people that are out there that are familiar with the show, but how did the three of you first come into contact with one another?
Maybe I could start that off because mine goes way back to 1959 or 60 when I was hired at Channel 17, the public television station in Buffalo, New York. I was in production, moved up the ladder to cameraman, producer, directors, then moved into instructional television, which was the daytime in school kind of programming. So I'm not an educator by school. My schooling was in production, but I soon became involved with a lot of committees of educators. And along the way, I came across the thing called the summer loss phenomenon, which is when kids don't read during the summer. And by this time, after 15 years of instructional television, I really knew that we could do something about this problem. And so we ventured through a lot of experiences, summers of research. And along the way, I met these people, and they probably can describe how they came aboard. Pam, you want to?
Pam, you were next. You were next on board.
So next on board. So, John, like you, the same spirit of how things come together in your life, how connected things are. I was preparing to be a teacher, studying media as well, and very curious and excited about how media and television work together and how media and education work together. And so as I got into that field in a master's degree program at the University of Buffalo, I started to ask, how could I learn more about this? And my professors put me in touch with Tony, and I became a graduate student intern in the Educational Services Department at the station. And I did that for a number of semesters, and it all kind of iterated into part-time work and more work and a little bigger job. But it was all happening during the time of the R&D work, the summer experiments in TV and reading that Tony was doing. And it was all happening kind of during the time of the early thinking of how to put a concept and proposal together for funding for a pilot and then for the series. So I was there working for Tony. I was a young lady. I wasn't in charge of too much, but I worked for Tony, and I learned a lot, and I became really a lover of public media and its educational mission.
And then, Barbara, how did you end up first connecting with Tony and Pam?
Well, similar to Pam, I started as an intern in the Educational Services Department at WNED when I was a graduate student in mass communication at the University of Buffalo. And I worked for 3 years. This was the early years, 84 to 87. Chose a different path after that, decided to head back to pursue a PhD in mass communication, and then became a professor for 32 years at Canisius. So, but that's how I met Tony and Pam as an intern back in the early 80s.
The fact that all three of you have a relationships plural, that go back many decades, I can really even feel just in the way in which you're sharing this, that there was something special even before the really something special was birthed. One of the things that we always love to be able to share, and before you dive more into the origin stories, before there was Reading Rainbow, there was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Of course, huge proponents of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood here at the Children's Book Spotlight Series. Fred Rogers is really one of the biggest sources of inspiration my entire life, in addition to my grandmother. And as many of you who enjoy not only the Children's Book Spotlight Series, you're familiar with our sister program, which is, of course, the Neighborly Reviews Bookcast, co-hosted by, again, you remember him and you love him as the beloved Mr. McFeely on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. We know him and we love him as David Newell. Before David was a co-host with me on the Neighborly Reviews Bookcast, wow, it actually went back to prior to Reading Rainbow. And this is one of the things that I learned through reading your book. And I'm like, wait a minute, now I see how the tea leaves line up and how the stars were written so many years ago. For those who are not familiar with how the world of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood helped to usher in the path and create Reading Rainbow, and it's in the early stages, could you share with us, Tony, about the pre-origins of Reading Rainbow and how David Newell was really doing his part long before the Neighborly Reviews Bookcast to let children, parents, and families know about the importance of reading to your children and children's literature? Could you tell us a little bit more about that, if you could?
Sure. I met Dave Newell at a couple of conferences along the way. Just knew who he was. We just clicked together and talked a lot. When I designed a format for Reading Rainbow, I quote in there, I want to host like Mr. Rogers. I really want Mr. Rogers. And actually, Dave Newell set up a meeting for me to meet Mr. Rogers. And Reading Rainbow wasn't back in my mind, but when I went to see him, I proposed a Mr. Rogers summer vacation program, knowing full well that he wasn't going to, want to host. He was so busy with everything else. But obviously, being as kind and loving as he is, we talked about this. We talked about it, and he pretty much suggested, well, maybe when you do this little show that you want to do, maybe you might want to talk to Mr. McFeely, Dave Newell. And of course, that's exactly what I did. We talked to Dave Newell, and we decided to do a thing called
Television Library Club.
I was thinking the other way. Television Library Club. Thank you. TLC. And we talked for a while, and we decided, why don't we work together? He's in Pittsburgh, we're in Buffalo, 4 hours apart. Visited him a few times. We kind of put together a little theme for doing a particular program called Television Library Club. And the idea was that Dave Newell, would come on as Mr. McFeely, talk to kids about a puzzle, a little thing about reading. Then he would introduce a program that was called, let's say, Spinning Stories, which was like a book-oriented program. Come back on again in the middle, talk for another 3 minutes about maybe a project, a craft, or something that he would do during the middle of this program. Then he would introduce another program called Book, Look, and Listen, that were produced in Maryland. And that was they were like 10-minute shows. So he had 3 parts. He also would do a closing about, reading, talking about the library. It was kind of a test to me of being able to develop a program. What if we had more money someday? What if we could get some dollars? And he was so supportive. He came, we spent days together. It wasn't really scripted. It was kind of semi-scripted, is the best way to describe it. And I remember at one point, I said, why don't you say this? And he answered me, he said, no, Mr. McFeely wouldn't say it that way. So I said, well, which way would Mr. McFeely say it? So we came up with lines like that along the way. But we did it, we broadcast the program in the summer, and then the following summer we did the same broadcast. We were beginning to learn a lot, and Dave has been quite a supporter all the way, and he's obviously involved in the book that we put together, I should say. So that was our connection with Dave. Sorry.
It's only fitting how the heart of Fred Rogers and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood really helped to welcome in what turned out to be Reading Rainbow. And again, there's something, obviously, again, things are different now in which they were back in the 80s and the 90s. There's something about PBS. When you heard that bum, 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 the little jingle for PBS, you knew that you were in for a treat. The connection to educating children, but really honoring kids where they're at on their path. Talking a little bit more about the origin story of Reading Rainbow, Pam and Barbara. One of the things that I wanted to also share is that when TV series are created, in many respects, it's LA and it's New York City. There's something about those 2 cities in many ways. So people might say Buffalo. Now, if you've been to Buffalo, you know. If you lived in Buffalo, you definitely know. But how did because in many respects, if people just watch Reading Rainbow, unless they read the book or are huge fans of Reading Rainbow, they may not be aware of the fact that it began in Buffalo. They might have thought, okay, it just, was facilitated in some sort of a TV studio lab in LA, or New York City, or, a larger, bigger metropolis kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us, if you could, about the fabric of Buffalo, the DNA of Buffalo, and how really Buffalo was instrumental to not only getting Reading Rainbow out onto WNED, but to public television stations across the country, because this is something that you really talk about and discuss through the course of creating Reading Rainbow as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll start, and then maybe Pam can pick up. Tony has always said if it weren't for Buffalo, he's not sure that Reading Rainbow would have come to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have in Buffalo, and had at the time, now remember this is 40 plus years ago, very progressively thinking and open-minded people that Tony was working with. So he jokes that he thought he was going to get kicked out of libraries when he walked in and suggested that there be a television show that could link with reading. But that was not the case at all. And Tony found librarians particularly supportive of the work that he was doing. He found teachers and educators who, again, were very supportive and not, again, he was thinking, well, maybe these teachers think we're trying to take their jobs away by doing a show about reading. That was not the case at all. It was a very collaborative sensibility in Buffalo, and I think that really propelled Tony. We did WNED did a series in the summer of '78 where they used a reading series, series for tweens called Studio C. And he worked with a small number of libraries and some people at the Buffalo schools. And at the end of that summer experiment, Tony wasn't sure it really went all that well. And he wasn't sure where to go next. And he thought he might hang up the towel. but he got a letter from a woman named Diane Chrisman, who was the children's librarian at the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library System, and said, there were some things that didn't really go the way we thought, and it was kind of okay, but let's do it again. Let's look towards next summer and see what we can do next. And that really was the thing that there are several turning points in the history of Reading Rainbow, and that was really a big one, was to have the support of the library system behind its effort.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Pam can talk a little bit more about the PBS side of things too.
Yeah, I mean, John, what's coming for me to mind here is, okay, the trailblazing Tony Buttino, who's forging new pathways for instructional television and educational media in the community. And he's being a good listener because he's not an educator himself. He's just a concerned, good worker. He wants to do right. And he's always listening to the educators, and he's listening to what they're saying about needs. Now, with like the public broadcasting hat on, right? Stations, if they're doing their job right, local public television stations are doing their job right, and they are, because they care deeply about this. They want to be responsive to the needs of their community, and that's what Tony was doing. And I have to say too, whether it's in that time period of the late 70s or 80s, or if it's in the time period of today, a local station, because it's part of PBS Kids, because it's part of PBS, there is a specialness there, and there is a trust of that institution. And local librarians and educators and families, want to be part of it. They want to be partners with us. We're a bit of a magnet in a good way, in a really good way. And together, that allows us to be really powerful with partners and create some really new things together. But I would also say, you're correct. In the world of media, then and today, when you take things up to a next level, and like the president then of WNED, Mr. Michael J. Collins was the president. He was Tony's boss. He says, we weren't saying we're going to have this brilliant award-winning show. We didn't start out thinking that. We just knew we were trying to do something good for the kids. And we knew that we were onto something, and we knew Tony's models were working and were positive. And so, Tony started getting the attention of other people in the system of public media. And it's those kinds of others that become partners and become collaborators that actually help you propel yourself to the next level. And getting to a next level, no matter what side of the country you're on, West Coast, East Coast, you need to put yourself together with others to go to that next level. And I think that was happening very naturally for Tony and the leader of the station then.
One of the things that I can probably look back on my childhood now and really see, feel, and understand, and also now see this through the lens of an adult, as well as a publicist for children's authors, there was a service-based mindset with Reading Rainbow. And I feel that, probably one of the biggest questions you guys have been asked is, what has it been like to have this show be shared in front of millions of children? And now, obviously, coming off the heels of the 40th anniversary of the show, there's a whole new generation of children that are learning about Reading Rainbow. The service-based mindset, I feel, is one of the top calling cards that makes Reading Rainbow stand out. It's long since been said, and I'll paraphrase this. I'm not sure if this might have been, Dr. Wayne Dyer who said this, or some other beloved spiritual teacher, is that when you focus on being of service, when you put the we before the me is taken care of. And there's a lot of people that are always worried about I, and from an unhealthy perspective, that could be a little bit of a slippery slope. But when you focus on the children, and you did that from day one, and learning more about the book, it wasn't like, we want to win these daytime Emmys, we want to win these Peabodys, we want it, all of this glory and adulation. That came through the pipeline, but you remain humble. And even just reading the book, which I really love, courtesy of our friends and neighbors at Rowman and Littlefield, by the way, I could literally feel that gratitude that humility where it's like, again, 40 years later, it's still there, it's still present. And I'm calling attention to that because that in many respects is a lost thing. Especially in this viral age in which we're in, it's a matter of like, what can go viral? How can I score the biggest check or the biggest success or the biggest glory, the biggest adulation? And there's nothing wrong with that if it's held in its proper perspective. But again, just seeing really connecting with the different threads of me, like I can just see how this show became a success, but we are continuing to enjoy. We're now just beginning to crack the cover and dive into the pages of Creating Reading Rainbow. Joining us as our featured guest here once again on episode number 215, the Children's Book Spotlight Series, to kick off our 10-year anniversary celebration at PR From the Heart, are the co-creators of Creating Reading Rainbow, Barbara Irwin, Tony Buttino, and Pam Johnson. We encourage all of you, our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course our fellow shining stars, to head on over to Amazon.com if that's your preferred online vehicle of your choosing. Be sure to leave a 5-star review after reading and enjoying Creating Reading Rainbow, because that's one of the many ways that you can pledge your support for Barbara, for Tony, and for Pam, to let them know that they're doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, educators, for those who love great children's books, for those who love reading Rainbow, and so much more. In addition, you can also head on over to your favorite children's and or independent bookstores or your favorite big box stores. If they do not stock their copies of Creating Rainbow, make that kind recommendation. Let them know that you heard about it here on the Children's Book Spotlight Series. And of course, as we like to say, not only our children's and independent bookstores, but also local libraries. They're the pillars of our community. If you head on over to your favorite local library, they do not stock their copy of Creating Reading Rainbow, same thing. Be sure to make that kind recommendation. Let them know that you heard about Creating Reading Rainbow here on the Children's Book Spotlight Series in the process. Going into LeVar Burton, you dedicate a full chapter of the book. You were, in essence, looking for your own Mr. Rogers. And again, for those who, LeVar Burton is a virtual institution. He must be protected at all costs, as I like to say. It's interesting because whenever I spend time in Pittsburgh with David and he's, I'm, taking him around town, there's this duty that I have. It's like, this man must be protected at all costs. And LeVar Burton, he's a national treasure. He must be protected at all costs. Of course, many people know him from his time on Star Trek: The Next Generation as well, too. But before that, it was Reading Rainbow. And, for those who've had the chance to see the Butterfly in the Sky documentary, it's talked about, of course, as well, but specifically for the case of our Children's Book Spotlight Series episode here and talking about Creating Reading Rainbow. Could you share with us a little bit more about the process of how LeVar Burton came to be? Because I can only imagine that, it's okay, who's the host, right? And there's, all of these people that might want to be a part of the show. But looking back on it now, it was just like, he fit like a glove. He really connected with the DNA, with the blueprint, with the heart of the show. But could you take us back to that time, Tony, starting off with yourself, when it's like, okay, we're going to have a host. Who is it going to be? Can you kind of walk us through that process? Take us behind the scenes of how LeVar Burton came to be the host of Reading Rainbow.
Sure, I can get it started, and then maybe Barb can pick up. But Buffalo, we had a blizzard 1977. Everybody was stuck either in a home, at a bar, at a school, and whatever. Kunte Kinte, LeVar Burton played the role, introducing Kunte Kinte, LeVar Burton. That's when I first saw him. But the interesting thing about that came up a lot later is that, it was based on a book, the book Roots by Alex Haley. And I guess subliminally, that caught my attention. I was home, fortunately, watching this and thinking, books. My first introduction to books and television was kind of at that point. I didn't think of it until later when we needed a host and tested certain people. And LeVar Burton's name came up. And I'll just tell you that when I went on when we did the pilot, I went on location. The first time I met him, the writer had to know a little bit about how LeVar could present himself. And the writers are very important in this. They're quite a team. And I met LeVar at that point, just some small talk because I didn't want to interfere with the production. But then I went off camera and listened to his presentation. I was there and he was doing the Gila Monsters meet you at the airport. And I actually said, this is our Mr. Rogers. I said, oh my God, we got it. And Barb, maybe you could explain how we got him. I think you have a story too.
Yeah. LeVar was actually a speaker at a conference, and this would have been the late 70s, that a woman by the name of Lynn Brenner Gannick attended. And she became one of the associate producers of the show. After he spoke at this conference, Lynn noticed that he was like a magnet to teenagers that were there, that they just wanted to talk with him. And LeVar stayed and talked with these kids for quite some time. That was something that she kind of stored in the back of her mind. A couple years down the road, as they are looking for a host and throwing names around and nothing is really clicking, Lynn discovered that LeVar was going to be a guest on a talk show in New York City. And LeVar was in New York as a stopover on his way to a whitewater rafting trip for American sportsmen. So Lynn called up Cecily Truitt, Larry Lancet, producers, directors of the show, and said, "You got to watch this newscast." They saw LeVar, incredibly engaging, called Lynn back and said, "Go get him." and they kind of thought, well, he's a big star and he just came off of Roots, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to get him. So Lynn called LeVar's manager, Dolores Robinson, and in a very quick kind of thing to catch LeVar before he left the country, made the connection. And LeVar said, "If you're talking about a show that's going to encourage kids to read, I'm in. Count me in." He went to his whitewater rafting trip, came back, was met at the airport in New York by a car that drove him directly to the pilot set. And nobody from the production team had ever met him before. He walked on the set, and Cecily said, "Is there anything that we can do for you?" And LeVar said, "I would love a glass of orange juice and a toothbrush," which they got for him, and then immediately proceeded to start the taping, which Tony just mentioned being on scene for. So he tested very well. They did a lot of research on the pilot episode, and LeVar tested extremely well with kids and with parents and with teachers and with librarians. And everybody agreed that he would make a perfect host for this series. And it was a very ahead of its time decision in 1983 to have an African-American man host a children's show. But there was much in the making of Reading Rainbow focused on diversity. And that was in the host, that was in the types of stories that were being highlighted and the books that were being highlighted, that was in the children that were selected to do book reviews on the show. Very intentional, and clearly it was the right choice to have LeVar Burton as the host.
And just to pick up on that, you mentioned the research. If it weren't for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, who encouraged us after we put in a proposal that we should do more research on this, that we got into all of that. Corporation for Public Broadcasting became big supporters of what we were doing. They thought what we were doing was unique. I mean, New York Times called us at one time wondering what was going on in Buffalo about television and reading. It was we have a chapter called Television and Reading, Are You Kidding? And so it was kind of, and CPB that Pam represents was important part of that.
This is something
the story of LeVar is really, finding him, securing him, getting him to want to do this. It was natural because also he's the son of a mom who's an English teacher, who was a teacher, and he believed in all this very deeply. And I would say for all of us, like whether it was the Corporation for Public Broadcasting or the PBS team, as a proposal's coming through for a pilot or for a series, it's always really wise to begin with a pilot, right? Have the team really get their model together and really build it, and build one strong pilot program that you can see and study and make sure you're doing well. But I would say that there were so many advocates in the education side and the programming side of PBS and CPB, and you need that whole system to try to work together too.
Very true. One of the things we always spotlight here, because it's always important to not only just provide inspiration for children and for parents and for families, but also showing that it is possible to overcome anything and get through to the other side. Undoubtedly, there were challenges and difficulties and problems and stressors and troubles and worries that you either felt and or experienced in the early stages and even throughout the course of the program. Obviously, I know that one comes to mind is that, when times began to change, and this was, around the advent of the internet, but that was obviously years after the show first began. Specifically of note, what were some of the biggest challenges, whether it be early on leading into the creation of the show, doors were closing, you were trying to have them open and they were closed, and then some of the specific challenges that you experienced along the way? And then what were some of the things that you feel help you to get through to the other side of those challenges, to get through to the other side?
Well, Barb mentioned a couple of things, and that was, again, us going out into this reading, libraries, and going out there as being somewhat of a challenge. As Barb mentioned, I thought I was going to be kicked out of libraries. I wasn't kicked out of libraries, but I had to work as a team with new people that I didn't know at all. And I think this is where the Buffalo connection, the City of Good Neighbors, comes about. There was one time when the Buffalo schools got a small grant for an activity book for a program we were running during the summer called Ride the Reading Rocket. And so the kids went home with these books. And I got a call from a parent that said, "What makes you think my daughter needs to read over the summer?" Obviously, she felt her daughter was a good reader. So that was I really never expected that kind of response from a parent, I guess. What we were trying to do is just, put our program out there, put the activity book out there, let them be doing something in the summer. And so I politely said, "Well, I don't know. It's you're the parent, so you can, decide as you will with what we were doing." And I don't know what happened after. We left it, but I never really thought about some people not wanting to do something in the area of reading for their children, no matter if they're good readers or not. And it just kind of struck me that I probably got to be a little careful with whom I'm talking to. But it wasn't a big deal. It was one parent, but maybe she represented others who wondered, "Wait, what's going on?" That was just one small thing.
John, you're probably asking sort of also maybe large picture challenges,
Yeah.
and although across a life course, right? Our particular part of the story is the prequel to Reading Rainbow becoming as large and successful as it did, right? So we're kind of the early foundational history, but to sustain anything across 25, 26 years. In a dynamic environment of media, which does change across time. Those are things that the creators of the show and the partners had to really think really hard about. And you're right, the nature of childhood remains similar yet different. I mean, children have foundational, fundamental needs for growing up and being loved and being supported, but the conditions around them change, and so the nature of the books you choose, sort of some topics you think about, are all things to consider across the lifespan of a series. And to the executives in all the partnering organizations, who also need to be very creative in how they looked for funding. Everybody who's a funder wants to, fund new things. What's new? What's special? What's different? What can we do now that's different? And so I think that to sustain a show over so many years, it is a real a piece of hard, demanding work, and people were brilliant at how they did that and really thought about, can there be books that deal with science and math, and maybe we go to NSF? Can there be books that deal with these subjects, and we have other funders do us? What special things can we do with outreach and engagement with kids that will be an extension of the show into everyday life? And there was such inventiveness and thoughtfulness about all that. People loved Reading Rainbow, and those who worked on it loved it. And Tony's language in that last chapter of the butterfly effect, it's about kind of the specialness. You use the word sort of divine intervention, but it's the idea of the specialness that surrounded and enveloped Reading Rainbow and the people who cared about it, and the ways that it was able to, everyone kind of had moments of beauty that kept propelling it ahead, because people cared about it a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I still feel that Reading Rainbow is, obviously one of the reasons why we're all connecting with one another is that in many respects, I feel, whether it be in my own way through the Neighborly Reviews bookcast, keeping on the memory and the legacy of Fred Rogers and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and now being the official publicist for Sharon, Lois, and Bram, and continuing to keep their memory and their legacy and their music alive. There's something about the word custodian. Custodian is not necessarily just someone at, like a janitor at a school who, mops the floors. A custodian is someone who is a caretaker, who does their part to be able to make sure that something continues, that the message in the heart remains felt in the process. Before we talk a little bit more about that, there were two other things that I wanted to briefly mention as well too. There comes a time in life when you know that you've made it. Right. And oftentimes in life, we can be lost in the rat race of striving instead of focusing on just being in the moment. I got to get here. I got to have this benchmark. Like growing up, it's like, okay, these are like the elusive benchmarks. Graduating high school, graduating kids, get your first job, graduating high school, graduating college, getting your first real job, finding your significant other, having a little one, getting a house. Like those are like the big benchmarks of life, so to speak. But to be able to just enjoy the things along the way. But it is important to highlight those big breaks, so to speak. When did you know? Was it a series of experiences? Was it a one-time thing? When did you know that Reading Rainbow was a hit and that the show had made it?
I think when a Buffalo writer wrote about it, who happens to be one of these writers, a TV critic who looks into ratings and numbers, and he came out with a column 1984, the year after Reading Rainbow premiered, and he pretty much said 6.5 million youngsters viewed the program at least, I think, once a week. And I was wait a minute, 6.5 million people, and that was the first year. And I'm thinking so that stunned me. But then I began thinking as the years went by, there were more and more youngsters as the series became even more popular. I'm thinking, wow, there's got to be a lot of millions out there. That hit me when I read that little article about the show. That was just something that really.
And Tony writes about the Emmys too. I mean, like, I think when the significant awards in the industry come, clearly it's not the reason you make shows. It's not the reason you necessarily do the work you do, but it is like a frosting on the cake. It's a very lovely moment when the producers and the hosts and everyone get to be acknowledged by the awards, like the Emmy and especially like the Peabody and so forth. Those awards carry a lot of beautiful weight for everybody, and that also tells you you've arrived. And Barb, I lose track of the numbers and all that, but there was a sequence of like 8-9 years where Reading Rainbow was winning something significant almost every single year. And that was quite a span.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it did earn 10 Emmys for Outstanding Children's Series, and I think it was 3 different sequences of 3 years in a row.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
Those are highlights. Mm-hmm.
And in the world of public media too, I mean, when you have all the public TV stations in America carrying it. And if you have so many of the stations doing deep outreach with it, and you have like, you do some sort of outreach initiative, like the Young Writers and Illustrators contest that Reading Rainbow did for like many, many years. And you have hundreds of kids all over the nation in every small community, big or small, submitting their own handcrafted creation of a book, children's book that they made and they illustrated. And then all the stations are doing this, and they have to have volunteers at the door because hundreds of kids are streaming in with their deliveries of their book, or teachers bringing their classrooms books. You know, you've constructed something special.
And I'm really glad that you guys are able to. It's long since been said to give someone their flowers while they're still here.
Mhm.
This is why I'm pleased as I can't even put the feeling into words, just seeing this resurgence that has been coming through with Reading Rainbow. Obviously, whenever there is the benchmark, 25, 30, 40, 50 years, whenever there's a big anniversary, it's like, okay, let's honor this. But as part of collaborating on this book together, the Netflix documentary, can you really put into words what this has been like? Not even, because again, all three of you are very humble. And the fact that it's not a matter of like, I'm expecting to get my flowers, but let's be honest, you put in time, energy, blood, sweat, tears. One of my former co-hosts of the former wrestling radio show that I co-hosted, Monday Night Mayhem, he used the term sweat equity.
Oh, yeah.
You put in a lot of sweat equity into this. What has this been like for you, knowing the fact that the show continues? The memory, the legacy that, as you said, just doing the math, within year one, as you said, Tony, 6.5 million children, you have inspired millions upon millions upon millions of children who are now adults, who, when they learn what they learned through Reading Rainbow, they're passing that on to kids. Can you put that into words? And if so, like, what does that mean to you, especially at this stages of your life, your career? I get a little emotional talking about this, and I was just someone who watched the show growing up as a kid, so I can only imagine that the emotions and feelings are being felt on a deep, visceral level on your end of things.
Yeah, I get emotional too when I just talk to somebody and they ask me what I did for a living and all that, and mention Reading Rainbow, and they break out into the song. I was at a graduation ceremony at Albany State for my grandson was going to be a lawyer, and he graduated, and he said, "Grandpa, you got to come and meet this guy. He wants to talk to you about Reading Rainbow." So I go, and this is one of the other graduates. I go to him, and, "Oh yeah, you really watched Reading Rainbow? Did you like it?" And all that. He takes out his phone and he plays the ringtone, and it's the butterfly in the sky. I thought, oh my God, he really was into it. And there's stories like that all the way. I helped unload I had a Reading Rainbow sticker on the back of my truck, and a fellow came over to pick up the lawnmower, and he saw that, and he says, I grew up on Reading Rainbow. A big husky guy, he's picking up this lawnmower. Yeah, I watch Reading Rainbow. And there's all kinds of stories like that. Every time I hear one, I get emotional over them. They're wonderful.
Mm-hmm. My role in the series was very minor, obviously in comparison to what Tony and Pam did. But I'm honored, and I consider it a privilege to have had the opportunity to make a very small contribution to what Reading Rainbow was all about. And I mean, as a professor of media studies, who always looked at the positive in terms of what the media can do. And this is a huge affirmation of that, of the benefits and the good things that watching television can do. And Tony's right. I mean, just in the writing of this book, we talked with many people, from the people who were involved behind the camera and LeVar as well, and involved in the creation of it, but also people who experienced it as viewers. And everyone has a Reading Rainbow story. And the show is so meaningful to people that it was not uncommon for people to be in tears as they were telling us stories about how much this series meant to them growing up. And that's very humbling.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have too much to add here. These are very profound statements, but I like what you're saying, John, about, honoring. We are honoring the station we worked for. It's now called Buffalo Toronto Public Media. And when we were there, it was WNED TV or WNED PBS today. But we're honoring the role of a station. We're honoring a colleague who really dedicated his career to educational mission of the station and the community, and had a significant role in helping to fuel something and launch something. And we worked really hard. There is a humility in us, and there's a love of collaboration in us. I would say we worked very hard to honor all the players who are part of this, and we write about the groups of people. We call them villages. We write about the people who all played a role, and it's so important to acknowledge that this became bigger than any one of us, and we were kind of blessed or fortunate through our labor of love and our own passion for public media, for Reading Rainbow, for Tony himself, and the station, where we were honored to tell this early part of the story.
I appreciate all three of your shares, especially when it comes to that specific thread. We're beginning to wind down our time with our featured guests here on episode number 215, the Children's Book Spotlight Series, as we're kicking off our 10-year anniversary celebration here at PR From the Heart. And we're placing the spotlight and the focus on creating Reading Rainbow, the brand new book. It is now available courtesy of our friends and neighbors at Rowman Littlefield. Joining us as our featured guests, Barbara Irwin, Tony Buttino, and Pam Johnson. We encourage all of you, again, our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course, our fellow shining stars, to head on over to Amazon.com if that's your favorite online vehicle of your choosing, your favorite preferred online vehicle of your choosing. One of the many ways you can pledge your support for Barbara and Tony and Pam is to leave a 5-star review for Creating Rainbow that lets them know that they're doing wonderful and much needed work still today for children, parents, families, educators, for those who love great children's books, for those, of course, who grew up on Reading Rainbow and still love Reading Rainbow. If you head on over to your favorite local library, your favorite children's and or independent bookstore, and they do not stock their copy of Creating Reading Rainbow, make that kind recommendation. Let them know that you heard about it here on the Children's Book Spotlight Series as well. And of course, the brand new documentary, Butterfly in the Sky, it is currently streaming on Netflix. You didn't have the chance to see it in the theaters. You have the opportunities to learn a little bit more about the entire series beyond the origin story of Reading Rainbow. One of the things that I also wanted to mention as well, too, as we're beginning to wind down our time, children were the focus of the show. You had children giving their thoughts and their own reviews of the show. One of the most beautiful photos that you captured, I believe it was on page I think it was like 154, if I'm not mistaken, but you see this line of kids, well, technically not this line of kids, but this plenty of kids just surrounding the WNED studios, and they're getting ready. It's like, okay, here I am. Like, here's my audition to be talking about my favorite children's book. And I can only imagine, like, there's a part of me, like, my life turned out the way that it was meant to beautifully. But like, if there was one thing, I'm like, man, if I could go back and, Doc Emmett L. Brown's Wayback Machine, if I could have found my way at the WNED studios, because I know that someone who we're all connected with, Tom Puckett, who is one of the instrumental forces at WBEN News Radio 930 in Buffalo. He was one of those children. I'm curious to learn about not only how, like, the kids that were chosen on the show, but also working with publishers regularly through the Children's Book Spotlight Series, through the Neighborly Reviews bookcast, through my work with children's authors. I've had the chance to work with the team at Holiday House and Simon & Schuster. I can only imagine, again, there came a point where it's like publishers, as part of their go-to for the promotion of their books, said, we need to get this book on Reading Rainbow. There was obviously something about that. So could you share with us about the process of how the kids were chosen and how the books were chosen? Because I can only, sometimes working with publishers can be like rainbows and gumdrops. But I've also seen the opposite where, yes, there is some ego in the world of children's literature. So I can only imagine that maybe you had some people that were trying to force their way on into your territory kind of thing. So could you encapsulate both of those spectrums, if you could, with working with children, working with publishers, and how the children were chosen and how the books were chosen?
Pam, you took a lot of that when you were.
Well, yeah, I mean, the children part, again, the producers, so Tony and others had this vision for, let's make sure we feature children talking about books. And that was in the earliest proposal to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, right? And then as it became to actualize that, okay, we have to make this work. How are we going to make this work now? The producers would, they, in the early seasons, and especially starting with the pilot, they came to Buffalo. They came to the WNED TV studios. They worked with Tony and us and others. And the main idea was to, whether through a cattle call at the station or the producing team going out to a school, like a Buffalo school, to just literally kind of flow into a classroom rather quickly. A very willing teacher, a willing principal, flow into the classroom and just start chatting with the class and taking a group of kids off to the side and talking with them or talking to the whole group, and kind of instantly, like in a little second or 2 or 5, getting a sense of, oh, this child has quite a presence. Oh, this child likes to talk a lot. This child is able to express themselves. I would say that the producers were looking for children who are articulate, who are okay with speaking, who had a little pizzazz and a little light in them. As Cecily said, they had a little light shining in them, each of the children who did a book review. And those are the folks that they would choose to come back and tape. And live on tape in the studio, they would help very carefully work a child through a set of thoughts and questions and ideas about the book. Never written, no script written, but asking the child questions about the book. And so that would be the putting together of a beautiful little book piece by children.
And Pam and I used to have to deliver some books to grandmothers and mothers and fathers at night to tell their kid, hey, have them read this and come to the studio the next day. So I got to give a lot of credit to Lancet Media Productions in New York City. I kind of found them, Cecily, through it, and went to visit and presented the idea of Reading Rainbow to her, and her husband, Larry Lancet, was the director. So I got a twofer on that one. They liked the presentation, and we brought them on board, and they came to Buffalo for some of these, and then we kind of turned it over to them. They had a team spirit. There's no I in the word team, and they, like you said earlier, John, this whole thing kept going, this whole thing of a team spirit throughout all of the productions, as far as I remember. Sure.
Yeah. In terms of the publisher piece, initially publishers weren't excited about having their books featured on Reading Rainbow because they saw television as, well, if kids are watching TV, then they're not reading books.
Right.
So it was difficult to get the okay from publishers initially, but soon after, after the 6.5 million viewers, it didn't take long for publishers to realize. And there's a quote in our book where someone says the best thing ever to happen to children's publishing was Reading Rainbow. And so then the publishers started making an effort to have their books included, and also to make sure that they were publishing paperback copies of the books to make them more affordable so that more children could actually have the books. So that was kind of a nice outcome of this as well, to get more books in the hands of as many children as possible.
Yeah, I think I remember a publisher saying that when normally a book gets 5,000 copies, well, when it got on Reading Rainbow, it went to 25,000, just like that. I didn't even think about it. And they put the label on the book saying it's a Reading Rainbow book, and parents go to libraries and say, my son saw this show about, this thing, and they knew. We would have to give them, the librarians needed to know what shows and what books we were going to feature well before the shows went on the air so that they could order the library. That's just an amazing story.
Yeah. And we should also say there's a beautiful appendix in the book that assembles all information about all 155 episodes of Reading Rainbow, a little synopsis of each episode, as well as identifying the feature books and all of the review books. So it's a great resource for parents and for librarians and for educators as well.
Mhm.
And I really love that part, especially because, for those diehard fans who I remember one of the vivid memories of my childhood. I still remember this is the episode when I believe it was Where the Wild Things Are, when that was featured on the program. So here I am, fast forward so many years later, and I still remember that. That is a highlight of the book for me, in addition to the quote that was mentioned, that being able to read is like having a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So I love the rainbow reference and how it really connects with reading as well, too. The lasting legacy. We're not here to write your epitaph. We're not here to write the epitaph in the show, because it's still ongoing. 40 years later, it's this resurgence. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to do my part to make sure that this show never dies in any way, shape, or form through my work at PR from the Heart. What do you feel is the lasting legacy? And it's a very powerful question. I'm sure there's going to be very powerful statements, but looking back, where you are right now, reflecting on 40 years, seeing how things have changed, how things have become better, but things maybe certain people feel that they become a little bit worse. What is the lasting legacy of Reading Rainbow?
Good question. I think it living on. I mean, it's like the show is like having a good library of books in your house. Kids go back and you read a book to them, and all of a sudden they come back the next day. Can you read this? I already read it, And I think Reading Rainbow will be a library for many, many, many years. And like a good book, it'll just be there. And I just feel that that's going to be living well beyond our years. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm with Tony, and I said its legacy is it's a model. It's a model for showing how media can be of service to children, and a very important goal of motivating and exciting kids about books and about reading. So it's a beautiful model, and of course there's our spirited, lifelong champion of literacy host, LeVar, and there's also the fact that every show helped introduce kids to a whole lot more that the book led to. And I think the idea that all learning is connected is a very big idea in Reading Rainbow. The book led to a beautiful field trip, led to an adventure and all of that. And it also led to the empowerment of children. And so I think that, there's a lot there that it represents.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really say much better than what Tony and Pam have said, but just the idea of engendering a love of books and a love of reading. And we've heard that so many times from people that we've talked with through writing the book. And what's more important than that for children?
Mm-hmm.
To have them love to read.
Right.
You help to educate children, not even just to inspire them to read, but in so many different ways, shapes, and forms. When we're done with grammar school, there's high school. When we're done with high school, there's college. When we're done with college, there can be graduate school. I feel that Earth is a school, and we're still learning each and every day. One of the poignant questions that I always ask as we close out every children's book Spotlight series episode, what has Reading Rainbow and creating Reading Rainbow taught the three of you about yourself and life?
Wow, that's a profound question.
That's a pretty profound. I love lapel pins, and I wear lapel pins, and certain ones of mine that people have given me because they think I represent the symbol is like full circle. Everything's connected. What goes around comes around. And I would say for me, the gift of the experience of collaborating with my friends on this book is a full circle moment. And it is a gift from the universe to take time to reflect on something meaningful that happened in America and happened in the field that I've dedicated my life to. and happened because of certain people. So for me, it's a full circle moment.
Mm.
I think good answer, Pam. I would have to echo that. To think that the three of us came together more than 40 years after all of this started, and that we've known each other for 40 plus years is really kind of remarkable. And I think there's a message in the making of Reading Rainbow, the television series, of perseverance and kindness. And in the writing of the book, Creating Reading Rainbow, I think those same threads run through in terms of perseverance and kindness. So we spent a long time working on this book. And for a long time, we were trying to figure out what it was going to be. And I kind of liken that to the experiments that Tony was working on back in the late 70s about what is Reading Rainbow going to be. And, fortunately for everyone, Tony managed to co-create a series in a lot less time than it took us to write a book about that series. But, things, life happens and things slow us down, but you persevere when you believe in something. And Tony believed, and everyone that worked on Reading Rainbow believed in what they were doing. And for me, this was a very important story to tell. So despite the setbacks and despite the delays and despite the wrestling with trying to figure it out, it was something that I believed, and I think we all believed, was an important story to tell. How did this series come to be? And what were the earliest origins of it? And that's what we focused on, that very early history.
Yeah, it's a journey. It was a journey starting it because we didn't know really where we were going in some way, shape, or form, but things kept coming to us. We kept working on the program, found good people. We all had some gifts that we brought to the table. I had committees of people who were just kind. And in fact, I did use the words perseverance. In fact, there's a book called Holy Moments that I read, and it talked about some struggles, but then pretty much said press on. The key words in that book were press on. So we pressed on, and then we pressed on again throughout all that time. And then came up with, obviously, the pilot, and then the series, found good people, and the rest is history, I guess, is the way to describe it.
That's very true. The two ways that we close out every children's book spotlight series, we give a little tip of the cap to our favorite neighbors we have throughout the course of our time here together, the late Mr. Rogers. And in many ways, whether it be through his time on the neighborhood, when he toured, when he traveled across the country, going to colleges for commencement speeches, in doing research at the Fred Rogers Institute several years ago, I learned that in 1991, I believe he was the keynote speaker at the American Library Association. It's very fitting coming off the heels of ALA being out here in San Diego this past weekend. Fred was very big on reminding us to be very appreciative of those people that came across our path. And most notably, he shared this not only in college commencement speeches, but when he received his Lifetime Achievement Award at the Daytime Emmy shortly before he passed from stomach cancer. And he said, and he always kept the time, whether it be 15 seconds, 30 seconds, or a full minute. He said, remember those who helped love you into being. Mm-hmm. And that was his way of saying, remember those rainbows, so to speak, that came across your path, that inspired you, that empowered you, that reminded you of your inherent worth and your inherent value, and that you have skills and gifts beyond measure. And so, who are some of the people that you would like to publicly recognize here in episode number 215, the Children's Book Spotlight series, that have helped love you, Barbara, love you, Tony, and love you, Pam, into being?
Well, we dedicate the book to our family, and I'm all about family. It's just support that you get and the love that you get from them that keeps you going. They love the book. I mean, they just support me in any way, shape, or form. They're waiting for my next adventure to do something. So you know, my wife, the children, the kids, grandchildren, 24 great grandchildren. So there's quite a few of them that I could name.
Yeah, it is family for me as well, and then my immediate family, but also there is a work family, and for those of us in the world of public media, it's more than a job. It is a calling. I'll be honest about that, and so for me, it's about standing on the shoulders of many others who really did significant work all along, and I'm getting to do it now, but I'm standing on the shoulders of people who did this in for Tony, and who do this for other producers and so forth, and all the leaders at WNED. I mean, we're standing on their shoulders too. So it's our beautiful personal families, and it is our work families.
Yeah. To our families is the dedication. So that's really important. I had wonderful teachers. I had wonderful mentors that taught me a lot about not only the work that I was doing, but also about life and life lessons. So so that's important.
And it's long since been said, and I'll paraphrase what Fred had shared, that no matter where those people are, if they are walking this earthly plane or they're shining down from heaven, they are smiling, knowing the positive impact, the indelible impact that you've made on countless children across the country and around the world. We're also huge Disney buffs here at the Children's Book Spotlight series. And one of the things that, is also similar to that Disney magic is also that Reading Rainbow magic, that we have the ability to bring to form and shape our dreams, our desires, our goals, our ambitions. We can fulfill our own wishes. And we have the ability to bring to form and shape to help other people bring their wishes to fruition as well. We go back to the year 1992. Reading Rainbow was indeed still on the air in its heyday. I believe I was 11, if I'm not mistaken. We remember the late Robin Williams. He voiced the beloved Genie of the Lamp in Disney's beloved animated classic Aladdin. We have a little segment that we have called Three Wishes. So everywhere we go, I love that smile on your face, Tony, we have this genie lamp, and it's been with us almost since day one of PR from the Heart and the Children's Book Spotlight series. All of you have given freely to children, to parents, to families, to educators, to caregivers, to custodians, to television stations. You've given freely from your heart for generations. Now it's your time to receive. So each of you are being given three wishes. Now, I think the only automatic disqualifier is you can't make someone fall in love with you. You can't ask for more wishes, but anything else is fair game. Sometimes when people come aboard the program, they're like, let me get this straight. I thought this was going to be an interview, and at the very end, like, I'm getting three wishes. This is pretty cool. So what would your three wishes be? They can be for yourself. They can be for the children of the world. They can be for our planet. What would your three wishes be? Barbara, I'll start off with yourself.
Wow. Didn't expect this one.
Better write it down.
I guess
I'm rapidly writing, Barb. So
Yeah.
you go.
Take your time, Barb.
I wish well, let's see. World peace. I wish for children to grow up in a world of wonder. And I wish this is going to sound maybe not at the plane of those other two wishes, but I wish a lot of people read our book to learn about the creation of this show that was just so important. So those would be my three wishes.
Tony, for your three wishes, what would they be?
Well, I deal with the homeless a lot. And that's something that I hope we could, I don't know, what's the word, eradicate or help them a lot with food, clothing, shelter, the things that I've been gifted with. I really would like that. I wish that we do something about whether it's called the environment or climate change, or I think cleaning up the earth, I guess. And I lost my wife a few years ago, and I knew a woman for like 40 years that I re-met and married. And for me, I wish we're doing very well, and I wish it continue. That's kind of selfish, but I'm looking towards our marriage together.
Well, profound question, John. I wish for all children to thrive and to have the most hopeful future they could possibly have. I wish for poverty that really does harm to so many people and families and communities to be eradicated. And I wish for all families to experience a richness and a joy and a love together in any way that they can, and that a healthy, beautiful environment for people to live their daily life.
Those are all beautiful wishes. And it's also long since been said that when one's wishes come from one's heart, they have a greater chance of coming true as well. One of the fastest growing recommendations in the world of children's literature. It's kind of a little bit similar yet in a little bit of a different way. If you remember the late Siskel and Ebert, when they loved a movie, they gave it 2 thumbs up. Well,
Right.
my little guy, little Forrest, who always likes to make appearances here on the Children's Book Spotlight series, we had the opportunity to read Reading Rainbow together, and he absolutely loves the book. Little Forrest gives 2 paws up when he loves a children's book or a book that is about children's books. You can tell this is his way of showing his affection. He gives 2 paws up for creating Reading Rainbow. So again, we encourage all of you, our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course, our fellow Shining Stars, head on over to your favorite big box store, favorite children's and or independent bookstore, or Amazon.com if that's your preferred online vehicle of your choosing. Be sure to purchase your copy of Creating Reading Rainbow. It is now available courtesy of our friends and neighbors at Rowman and Littlefield. One of the many ways that you can pledge your support for Barbara, for Tony, and for Pam is by leaving that 5-star review after reading and enjoying Creating Reading Rainbow. If you feel called and guided to do so, leave that 5-star review. Let them know in the process that they're doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, educators, and for those who love great children's books. We've also included the official social media platforms for Creating Reading Rainbow. Keep the conversation flowing and going, as we like to say. Share some of your favorite Reading Rainbow memories, because again, the show began 40 years ago. There are countless memories that I have alone, and there's definitely more memories that are out there in the process. And continue to do your part as you feel called and guided to do so, to continue to keep the memory and the legacy alive of Reading Rainbow, because this is an institution that, as far as I'm concerned, should never die. It needs to continue to be put out for the next generation of children and the next generation of children beyond that. But when we hear the trolley, even though this could go on for hours and hours, we always like to try to be mindful and respectful of time here at the Children's Book Spotlight Series. But when we hear the trolley, that means that it is time to go. But fear not, there are many more magical trolley stops here to come on the Children's Book Spotlight Series. We're still in the midst of our summer reading season. We're just kicking off our 10-year anniversary celebration here at PR from the Heart. And of course, as part of the back to school season, this fall, we are going to be celebrating the 6-year anniversary of the Children's Book Spotlight Series. Translation, there's a lot of celebratory energy in the air. If you are a children's author or if you are a middle grade author and would love to share your inspiring story and the release of your brand new children's and or middle grade book, just like Barbara and Tony and Pam did here on the Children's Book Spotlight Series. If you would like to be a featured guest on the program, head on over to our official website, prfromtheheart.com, or connect with us via any of our social media platforms that you now see on screen. Instagram, Facebook, and X, all at PR from the Heart. Little tip of the cap to, of course, we mentioned his name previously, but our beloved friend and neighbor, David Newell, you remember him and you love him as the beloved Mr. McFeely on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the popular long-running PBS children's television program. We know him and we love him as David Newell. David and I, we join together each and every month for the sister program of the Children's Book Spotlight series. That is the Neighborly Reviews Bookcast, one of the most popular children's book review programs for parents and for educators. That is available online. If you are a children's author and would love for David and I to deliver a heartfelt review of your brand new children's book on a forthcoming edition of the Neighborly Reviews Bookcast, you know where to connect with us, prfromtheheart.com, and any of our social media platforms, all at PR From the Heart. And it really is a joy and a blessing. And I say this with full appreciation and gratitude in my heart as I'm celebrating the 10-year anniversary of being of service to children's authors. The earliest seeds were planted for my work, what I'm blessed to do for a living, by watching Reading Rainbow as a child. I get very choked up talking about that. There are many authors, some of the top in the industry that we've had the opportunity to be of service to. Sharon Lois and Bram, John Parra, Catherine Roy, among others. So if you are a published children's author with one of the larger publishing houses or a self-published author and your journey is just taking flight, we're in the process of creating some beautiful national book media tours for many of our favorite shining stars. So if you would like for some dedicated PR support and let us see how we can be of service to you, head on over to our official website, prfromtheheart.com, as we're proudly again beginning our 10-year anniversary celebration, and let us see how we can create your very own national book media tour or book media tour in a city of your choosing. One final time, you can head on over to amazon.com or walk into your favorite big box stores, or your favorite local and or independent children's bookstores to purchase your copy of Creating Reading Rainbow. You can also, again, head on over to amazon.com if that's your favorite online vehicle of your choosing. Continue to keep the memory and the legacy alive of this program. It's very important that we take the time to be able to do that, even amidst the changing world and the streaming platforms and things of that nature. The fundamental core of children is knowing that they are special, that they are loved, that they're safe, they're protected, and that they have skills and gifts beyond measure. So we want to thank you for your continued support of PR From the Heart, for your continued support of the Children's Book Spotlight series, for your continued support of children's authors and illustrators and those who are helping us to remember those wonderful memories that we shared, especially growing up. Just like Barbara, just like Tony, just like Pam, for your continued support of local libraries and children's and independent bookstores. As we like to say, the pillars of our community. But above all else, we want to thank you for helping us to walk home the children of the world. One final time, little tip of the cap to Mr. Rogers. We have felt the spirit of our favorite neighbor throughout the course of this trolley stop, especially in many ways. Did you know, by the way, that Mr. Rogers weighed 143 pounds for his entire natural adult life? That was his way when he walked this earthly plane. He was reminding us of our inherent worth and our inherent value. He reminded us of how loved and special that we were. One letter in I, 4 letters in love, 3 letters in you. As a little tip of the cap to our favorite neighbor, Mr. Rogers, as a tip of the cap to the team at Reading Rainbow, to Barbara, to Tony, to Pam, for their entire crew, we like to share our favorite 3 numbers of 243. There's 2 letters in we, 4 letters in love, and 3 letters in you. In our own private numerology, that is our way of saying that we love you. We see your inherent worth, your divine value, and then some. We are reminding you that you are liked, that you are loved, that you are precious beyond measure, that we like you, that we love you just the way that you are. If you have enjoyed this trolley stop that has been episode number 215, the Children's Book Spotlight series, if you haven't had the opportunity to do so, again, one of the many ways you can pledge your support for the team at Creating Reading Rainbow, for the creators of Reading Rainbow, everyone who is a part of keeping this beautiful institution alive. And also one of the ways where you can pledge your support for the Children's Book Spotlight series and PR From the Heart. Subscribe to PR From the Heart's official YouTube channel and share this very special trolley stop that you have officially enjoyed. That is episode number 215, the Children's Book Spotlight series. By subscribing to the PR From the Heart YouTube channel, you can join the more than 16,000 members of the PR From the Heart family. This has been a true joy. There's no other better way that we could have had it than kicking off our 10-year anniversary celebration talking about Reading Rainbow. And of course, the Netflix documentary, it is now available, by the way, in case you haven't had the chance to watch it. Butterfly in the Sky is now available. So for Barbara Irwin, Tony Buttino, for Pam Johnson, for little Forrest, For myself, John Masiulionis, thank you for helping us to kick off our 10-year anniversary celebration, for continuing our summer reading season, and for joining us here on this special episode of the Children's Book Spotlight Series. Thank you for helping us to walk home the children of the world, our fellow friends, our fellow neighbors, and our fellow shining stars. Goodbye for now.
Thank you, John.